Welcome everyone to another Scratch tutorial. Today I'll be showing you how to make this really cool 3D in Scratch. We will be using a program called Magica Voxel to create the model, then we will go through a process to import it into Scratch, and then use a technique called 2.5D, or layering, to take the layers of the 3D model and stack them on top of each other to create this really convincing 3D effect. It isn't true 3D, since you cannot turn the camera angle up and down and it's just layers. However, you can still make some really cool and interesting games with this. In part 2, we'll be making the shadows for this, so you can change the angle of them and even the length. I hope you guys will enjoy this tutorial, and let's jump right into it. So first we have to install the program. So this is the official page for Magica Voxel. I'm going to leave a link for it in the description below. So we're going to click on download latest. That's going to take us to a GitHub page to download it. So for example, I am using Windows, so I will click on the win64.zip to install the Windows version. However, if you're using Macintosh or another operating system, you can click on one of the others. Once it is done downloading, then it will appear as a compressed zip file, which then you can click on, right click and click extract all. Once it has finished, well, then it will appear as a regular file folder, which then you can open up. Then you can open up the folder inside. And here are all of the program files, including the executable, which you can double click to open. So here we are in Magica Voxel. It may seem a little bit overwhelming at first, however we won't be learning everything in today's tutorial, and we will be only using the basic tools. You can also check out other tutorials on YouTube to find out about the other more advanced features of Magica Voxel if you're into that. So first we're going to learn how to move the camera. You could hold the right click button to rotate the camera, or use the middle mouse button to pan around. You can also use the scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Now, first of all, we're going to clear this region so that we have some space to work with. So we're going to go over to the edit tools and click on clear. Now that we have an empty region, we can also change the size of this region. Right now, up here, the numbers define the size of it. So we currently have 40 voxels wide, 40 voxels long, and 40 voxels tall. However, if we wanted, for example, to make it more wide, we will change the first number, which is the x value, to something greater, like 50. And now we have a wider region. Now you can change this to anything you want, of course. Now we're going to add some voxels. Using the attach mode, we can add voxels using our brush, and our brush here has the different modes. By default, it will be the box mode, which can create a box. So let's click and drag. And as you can see, we just created a nice box. Now the erase tool does the exact opposite. Instead, it removes voxels. Just like that. And a paint tool replaces voxels. If we select a different color, like this one over here, you can see that now we can paint the voxels. However, it won't add or remove voxels. If, however, you want the color that isn't listed here, you can actually go down here and click on this color arrow, and here you can make your own customizable color. Now, there are also different brush modes. For example, we can use the extrude tool, which instead extrudes faces. So if we go back to attach and select our original color, now we can stretch out the different faces. Just like that. We can do the same thing with the erase or with the paint tool if we select a different color. There. Now you can also select things in Magica Voxel using the select tool. So this one right here is just a simple rectangle select. So if we just click and drag, we will select all of the voxels that we have selected that were in front of that rectangle. So if we move our camera to the side, you can select all of the voxels, and now that you have them selected, you can press delete on your keyboard to delete them, or you can use the delete tool over here and then click to delete it, or you can use the replace tool, the region replace, to paint it a different color. We can also use the eyedropper tool, which doesn't have anything to do with the select tool. However, if you're working in a model with a lot of different colors, you can use this tool to simply click on a color, and it will select the color again, instead of you having to look all over the color palette to find the color you are using. Now that we're done with that, let's start actually making a model that we will use for our Scratch game. So I'm going to select everything and delete it, or you can just click clear here again. And I'm going to make our region a little bit smaller. So I will make it 20 wide and 20 long. And maybe something like 15 tall. Now I think what we're going to make is a little tree. So I'm going to start off with the touch tool and the box select mode. We're going to be using a color brown. I think this one will be good enough. And I'm just going to click it to add a voxel, and I'm going to use the extend tool to extend it upwards. Now that we have the trunk, we're going to add the leaves of the tree. So we can use the point brush, which has a circle or a square, and then a radius. So I'm going to add a radius of something like 7, or maybe a little bit bigger. Let's try 9. There, that looks better. So now I'm going to select a green color, click, and ta-da! We have a simple tree. Now however, this tree is looking a little bit flat, without lots of difference in colors. So I will be selecting a slightly different color, and then I'm going to use the paint tool, reduce the radius of the paintbrush again back to 1, so now we can only have single voxels, and I'm just going to randomly paint random parts of the tree this new color. Now our tree looks a little bit more realistic. Now I'm going to make actually 2 trees by copying and pasting this tree. So I'm going to select it, make sure to select the whole thing, and then on my keyboard I'm going to hold the control button and then the C, and then I'm going to hold Control V. Now it may seem like nothing happened, however it actually did copy and paste your model. However, right now both models are inside of each other, so we have to use the move tool and select it and move it sideways. As you can see here, if you move it through the border, it kind of automatically portals through to the other side. We don't really want that, so I'm actually going to undo and move the original model off to the side a little bit. That way we have room for both trees. Now I'm going to copy and paste again, and now move that. And now we have 2 trees right next to each other. Nice. However, we don't want both of our trees looking the exact same. So what we're going to do is that we're going to select just the leaves of this tree. I'm going to deselect first, and now select just the leaves. Make sure we haven't selected any of the trunk. And now what we are going to do is that we can drag and select multiple colors at once. What this is going to do is that now if we right click and click on rand, this will randomize our selection and set it to the different colors that we have selected randomly. So if we click that, now you can see that it randomly sets these colors. However, I think that one of these colors is a little bit too bright, so I'm going to do it again, but this time only select these 2 colors. Right click, click rand again, and ta-da! Now it is random. Now we are ready to export it. So let's go down here to this export button, and when we click on it, we have a little menu pop up with many different export options that we can choose from. For example, we can export it as a 3D model, as point clouds or more, but what we are going to be exporting it as is a slice. This will create a big sprite sheet with each layer of our model. You will see better what I mean in a bit. So let's click on that, and then choose the location to save it to. So once you are done exporting it, it should be saved somewhere on your computer as an image file. So let's go ahead and open it up and take a look. So you can see that it looks very strange at first, and this is because it is a sprite sheet. So what Magica Voxel basically did is that it would take each layer of our 3D model from bottom to top, and then takes a cross section of that, and then makes that into pixels. Since voxels are almost like 3D pixels, imagine it, let's have an example. Imagine it like as if takes that cross section, and so for example, if we were to take that layer in Magica Voxel, it looks like this, and we can find that layer right over here, or we can do it again with a different layer. Let's do this one. And then it simply takes this cross section and exports it as an image. And then once it has all of these cross sections, it layers them as images, one above the other. So now what we need to do is take another program and then use that program to take each of these individual cross sections that are all layered on top of each other and mashed into one image, and then separate them into their each individual images, so that way we can put them all into Scratch as separate costumes and layer them on top of each other to create the 3D effect. So the next step is to open a web browser, any web browser would do, and you can either go to the link in the description of this video, or you can search up in the search bar sprite sheet cutter or sprite cutter. Then probably one of the first results would be easygif.com, and this is a relatively simple website to do a few different processing with images. So we're going to choose the file where we stored our export. So I'm going to choose the tutorial.png, and then we're going to click on upload. Once it is done uploading, you can see our image over here. And now for it to properly cut our sprite sheet into the proper separate images, we have to specify either the size of each tile in pixels or the number of columns/rows. So we're going to do this by pixels. And so to actually know what the size of each of our individual tiles is, we actually just have to go to Magica Voxel, and each tile will be the same size as our width and length of our model, which is up here. So in this case it is 20 by 20. So I'm going to put in 20 for the width and 20 for the height, and then we're just going to choose an output. I'm just going to leave it on PNG, and I'm going to click on cut. Once it is done processing, you can see it has all of the individual tiles over here. However, in this case they are so small we can barely see them, but that also doesn't really matter. And now I'm going to download the frames as a zip. Once it is done downloading, we can go down to File Explorer and find our download, which is a zip file that has kind of a strange name, but that's okay. We just have to click on it, right click, and click on Extract All. I'm going to extract it to the default location and delete the zip file since we don't need that anymore. And once we open up this folder, we can see our sprite sheet has been cut into all of the individual images. So now it is finally time to start the Scratch. So here I am in a brand new project, and so we're going to start off with a typical when green flag clicked block, and now we're going to make the sprite go to a certain position. I'm going to make it go to X 0 and Y -20. However, of course you can set this to anything you want. Then we need to make sure that the main sprite is hidden. We're going to be using clones for this, so each clone is going to be its own layer, and when the project starts, the sprite is going to create one clone for each layer, and the clone is going to set its costume to that layer, and then it will simply follow whatever the main sprite does. So we're going to create a new block and call it something like create clones. And I'm going to make sure that this is run without screen refresh. That way, when you start a project, it creates all of the clones instantly without having to create one per frame, like you would usually do with a loop. So to define the block, we're going to first of all make the clone switch to its own layer. So for this, we need to first of all import all of the layers that we just created earlier. I'm going to go down here and click on Upload Costume, and then we're going to find a folder where we exported all of the images to. We're going to go there, and then we actually want to upload them from last to first. You'll see why later. Then we're going to go over here and set the mode to details, and then click on this name filter up here, so that way it inverts it, so that now it goes from bottom to top. We'll select the top one, hold shift, select the bottom one, and now we can click open. Now that we have all of the layers imported, we can go and delete the two cat sprites. Now, back to the code. We are going to first of all switch the costume to the very first layer, and then we are going to create a new variable, and we can call it cloneID. Make sure to set this for this sprite only, so that way each clone has its own copy of this variable. This variable is going to be used for the clones to keep track of which layer of the 3D model they are themselves. So this is extremely important. Now we can click on OK to create it, and we are going to set it to 1. Now we can have a repeat loop to actually create the clones. I'm going to go over to repeat, and then inside of that we are going to drag in a create clone of and a change block. We're going to change the clone ID by 1 so that each clone is the next layer before the other, and we're going to set this number to the number of layers that we have for a 3D model. So I'm going to go back here, and we can see that we have 15 costumes, which means we have 15 layers to our model. So we want to create 15 clones, 1 for each layer. And now once at the end of the loop, we are going to go to the next costume, so that way each clone actually sets its costume to the next layer. Now that we are done with this, we want to actually program the clones to follow whatever the main sprite does. We're going to use a when I start as the clone block, and then we're going to make it show. Now in a forever loop, we're going to run another custom block, which is going to tell the clone to basically follow whatever the main sprite does. So we can go to my blocks, make a new block, and call it something like follow main sprite. Now we also want to make sure to set this to run without screen refresh. Once we click on OK, we are going to define it. First of all, we want to go to the position of the main sprite. So we are going to use a sensing block to actually get the position of the X and the Y of the main sprite. However, there's a problem. You cannot actually select the sprite that you are currently working in this block. So instead, what we're going to do is create this block while we have the stage or a different sprite selected. Now we can actually select the sprite, and now we're going to drag it into the sprite, and we can delete it in the stage. And then here we have it. We can actually get the X position, Y position, or other parameters of the main sprite that we currently have selected. So we're going to drag it in for the X position and the Y position, and we can also make it point in the direction that the main sprite is pointing in. Now before we test it out, we have to actually put our custom blocks into the forever loop to make it follow the main sprite, and we have to actually put the create clones custom block in the when green flag click block, so that way it actually creates the clones in the first place. Now when we run it, we can see it creates all of the clones successfully. However, 1, it is very small, and 2, you can only see what looks like to be only 1 layer. Now the actual reason for this is because we are going to the position of the main sprite. However, each layer has to actually be higher up than the previous one for them to actually look like they are on top of each other and create the 3D effect. And we don't have that right now. So to fix this, after going to the main sprite, we have to actually change the Y position by whatever layer the clone currently is. So we're simply going to drag in clone ID for this one. So now we're just going to go to the main sprite, go higher up depending on what layer it is, and then it's going to point in the direction that the main sprite is pointing in. So now we run it, you can see we actually have it working. However, of course, it doesn't really look 3D yet. To make it look 3D, let's add some rotation. This is quite simple. All we have to do is go to Control, drag in a forever loop, and make it, for example, turn left, maybe 1 degree. If we run it again, you can see that now we have our rotating 3D model. Isn't that awesome? Now, of course, to fix the very last issue, which is that it is extremely small, all we have to do is just go to looks and set the size to something a lot bigger. I'm going to put 400%. Run it again, and you see that now it is way too big and you cannot even see the trunk. So to fix this, we need to make each layer go even higher up than the previous one. So we're going to use a multiplication block, and we're going to multiply clone ID by, for example, 4. And now you can see that it actually looks a lot better. One very last thing that you might want to fix though is that if you have very little layers, so in this case 15 layers isn't actually quite that much, you can see that very jagged edges. And that is because obviously it is not an actual 3D model, they are just images stacked on top of each other. So if you spread them out far enough, you can see them actually disconnecting and you can see the separate layers, which is quite an issue. So to fix this, we are going to create multiple clones for each layer. So what we're going to do is, instead of create a clone, change the clone ID, and go to the next costume, we're going to add another repeat loop inside and repeat this, for example, 2 more times. Now we're going to drag the next costume out of it, so that now every layer, it will create 2 clones, and each clone will be slightly higher up than the previous one, and then it will go to the next costume. So now if we run it, you can see that we have definitely a lot more layers, however our trees are extremely stretched. Simple fix, we just have to multiply this by a smaller number, for example 2, and now if we full screen it again, you can see that there is a lot less jagginess. Of course you can go on with this and make it, for example, 3 clones per layer, and maybe make this an even smaller number, like 1.5, to make it even higher resolution. However, I would recommend you watch out, because if you add too many clones, it can make the project quite laggy, or it can reach the clone limit, which is 300 clones. And that was pretty much it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you made something cool and even learned a few things. In part 2, we will be adding some really cool shadows to make it look even more 3D, and maybe a few other small things. I will also probably make a part 3, and most likely will even make a game with a tutorial based off of this technique, so make sure to subscribe to stay tuned. If you need help with anything, I also have a Discord server which you can join, or you can also just say stuff in the comments section below. Have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.